I think reading about skinwalkers was my biggest mistake ever. It reminds me of something I never wanted to think about again. It gets more horrifying for me to know that other people experienced something similar. Be kid and play outside a lot with friends. Live in village next to forest. The nearest house to the forest wall belongs to a friendly old man. He gives us candy and treats us like his grandsons. As time goes on, he becomes weaker and has to use a cane to walk. One day his attitude changes abruptly. Sits in his rocker on his porch staring into the village. Doesn't recognize us anymore. Sometimes stands up to go inside. This goes on for a week. Parents tell us to leave him alone because he's facing death. We still ride our bikes past his house. One day a kid notices that he doesn't use his cane to walk. His movements are very stiff though. Other kid moans that he doesn't get candy anymore and we should observe him to check if he's eating them himself. Kid logic. Hide in a bush behind a window and peek inside. The old guy just stands up straight, something we thought he wasn't able to do, in the middle of his living room and has an emotionless and blank expression on his face. Still remember his hands weirdly gesticulating with nobody. All of us get creeped out. We run back to our bikes. Hear door opening. Old guy comes out and opens his mouth, but no voice can be heard. Reasonable kid asks if he needs help. He doesn't reply, but gets on his knees and pulls sticks covered in candy cane paper out of his trousers. He's crazy, a friend commentates. We leave. Next day the ambulance and police investigate the house. Apparently the old man has been found dead in his bed. Overhear a conversation between paramedic and cop. Remember it like yesterday. Unfortunately he's been dead for over a week. Think it's strange since we saw the old man alive a day before. Village is shocked about the death, but everyone believes the paramedic made a mistake. Ride my bike days later past Grandpa's house. See a human-like figure standing in the forest watching the house. Go home and develop sleeping problems. I put it down as a weird childhood experience that could be explained with logic, but many things are characteristics of skinwalkers. Thanks X. Be me. Be senior year. Dad gives me old car so I can get to my job. Piece of shit old car.zip. Job is being old rich neighbor's gardener. Shit is exhausting but get paid mad cash. Fast forward a couple months. Halloween is coming around. Rich old fuck comes out and asks me to do some decorations for his house. Asks me to dig up some holes to look like empty graves. Cool idea, but more shit for me to do. Completely forget about that for about 2 weeks. Rich fuck says I have to have decorations done by the 28th. Fuck's sake. Rar. Ask friend for help. We'll call him Ben. Ben comes over and helps me put up statues, lights, and all the shit. 28th comes around and old fuck is pissed because we forgot the empty graves. Tell him we can still get it done if we hurry. He approves and says the next time we fuck up he's not paying us. Get to digging so-called graves until a car pulls up and 3 ancient-looking grannies come out. Like these women looked like witches you see in cartoons. I got so distracted by how fucking ancient these cunts were that I dropped my keys in the hole I was digging. God damn it. Ass anyway we keep digging for about 4 hours until I smelled something weird. Asked Ben if he smelled it too. Yeah, smells smoky dude. Went inside Rich Dick's house to see what it could be. Looking. Can't see anything. Until I see it. Oh shit, oh fuck, oh shitty fucking shit. The outlet that the lights are plugged into is on fire. One of the ancient cunts comes down to see what's going on. Got too close to the fire. She immediately goes up in flames. Realize I have to get the fuck out of here. Oh shit, my dumbass forgot to grab the keys when I dropped them. Fuck, have to find them. I'm digging through the ditches. I burned through the witches. And I slammed in the back of my Dragula.
Work night shift alone at a gas station. Early 50s man wearing all black and sunglasses at night comes by and is in the middle of a conversation. I assume he's on the phone or has a wireless headset, but he's just talking out loud with pauses as if he's listening to the other speaker. He wanders around for a while and comes up to the counter to buy some smokes. I sell them to him, and he lingers for a bit before asking me, "Whose side are you on? Devil or angel?" I answered I'm feeling a little devilish. And then his entire mood shifts, and he physically shifts himself, as if he's about to get in a fight with me. I had another customer to take care of, so I ignore him, but not before he tells me you shouldn't have said that. Before walking back outside, he paced around the gas pumps for a while until some other customers shoot him away. Still think about him sometimes.
That was the Archangel Michael. He was talking to God. You chose your side.
Thought I might as well share my story, bit of background info on my house. It's pretty big, and we have a large yard too with lots of animals, and a pool and 4 ponds, 2 in the front yard and 2 in the backyard. Be about 9 to 10 going to see our grandma. Can't leave animals home to starve to death, so we hire a lady to homesit. She has 2 kids, 3 and 4, both of which can't swim yet. Lady calls up my mum one night and asks if our house is haunted or if we ever notice anything strange. We have sort of talk about it later. Mum tells her about our old lady ghost. Lady starts freaking out. Tells my mum that her daughter got out and managed to make her way into the pond. She woke up to hear lots of splashing, so she runs out and asks the kid how she got out, and the kid just goes, "The old lady helped me out." The kid's mum is confused and is like, "WTF, what old lady?" And the kid starts going on about how there's this old lady that lives in the house with us. Mum's like, "Shit, we're Australian and my mum's pretty butch manly. But yeah, this old lady ghost is like constantly walking around upstairs when everyone is downstairs and the dogs are locked out, and well, randomly hear like someone having a shower and humming. Nothing ever really super spooky, but yeah." Another story. Be me 4. Sleeping in my dad's room cause I am young and like the company. Wake up about 5:30 to 6:30. Walk down hallway to chuck a piss. See a girl-like figure probably same height as Op standing in front of me with her arms bowed. Nope, the kick out of there screaming. Dad wakes up, asks me what happened. To this day I'm not sure if I was just like half awake being a kid with a good imagination or if it did happen, but it was fucking spooky and I can only remember it vaguely being so young.
There once lived a beautiful man. He was a flower collector. He would spend many a day wandering about, collecting up flowers from pretty little girls. The pretty little girls would see him, and his beautiful smile and his beautiful eyes, twinkling ever so kindly, and they would smile ever so sweetly back. Over the years the beautiful man collected many flowers, all from pretty little girls. And though he saw many pretty little girls with flowers he would have loved to add to his collection, he was not a thief. Nor would he force the pretty little girls to hand over their flowers. He would only take the flowers that were offered to him. He would collect these flowers and hold them to the light, smiling his beautiful smile at the pretty little girls that had given them to him. He would smile and he would thank them and give them a gift of his own. In return for each and every flower a pretty little girl gave him, he would give each and every one of them a seed to plant so that other pretty little flowers would grow, you see. Some little girls grew beautiful flowers, and the beautiful man delighted in these. Some, however, just couldn't seem to care for such delicate little things, or grew the wrong type. And some flowers that were grown were quite ugly, with thorns and spikes, and in such drab and hideous colors. Nonetheless, he cherished each and every one of the flowers the little girls grew. And as a flower collector, he chose to collect up every single one.
Me and brother are in room on the floor. Late at night and our parents are asleep. We aren't supposed to be awake, so the lights are off. We're just quietly talking to each other and messing around with some Legos or something. We more or less whispering back and forth non-stop like kids do. Something suddenly crashes downstairs, probably the cat knocking something over. We both pause. But the whispering doesn't. We look at each other. We are definitely not doing it. Something behind my brother moves. I go to say something and I get a brief view of it as a car passes. What I can only describe as a mummy is lying under my brother's bed looking at me. It's not a bandage type mummy. This thing looks like a body that's been left baking in the sun for decades. It has very big teeth. It is reaching for my brother. The whispering is the sound of its skin on the floor. I scream and jump up. Turn on the light. It's there for a split second, then it's gone. Brother thinks I'm crazy. He didn't see it. Never tell him about it. shove a bunch of boxes and sleeping bags under his bed, make up some shit about seeing a mouse under there. He doesn't question it. Never saw it again.
Kinda drinking at the moment, so grammar and spelling gone. Live in Florida. About 2 weeks ago. Walking to uncle's house to get ice, we own a good-sized piece of land. Walking past driveway, hear semi-loud but low rumbling gravel coming from one side of the van. Shine light, thinking oh shit, a big ass dog. Nothing, oh okay. Walk about to RV as I do see my dog in my yard staring at something behind me, not bark, but backing away under the RV. Should point out I have a cooler for the ice, a laser light, what the brand name is, but it's the big ass floodlight that can catch things on fire when on max and blind the fuck out of you, and a handgun, because there are things out here in Florida that can fuck you up. That's not spooky. Anyways, see my dog doing this, get really bad feeling. It's been windy most of the week, so it's hard to hear anything. As I get closer to my gate, I get ready to turn around to confront whatever is behind me. At this point I'm thinking like fucking black bear or panther. So I drop my cooler with ice, hit the high on my flashlight, and handle my gun and turn around in like 4 sec to see something in the fucking woods. At first on 4 legs, and I'm thinking fuck bear, this thing is big, shoulders up, chest, walking on all 4, trying to go deeper into the woods bush. It's staying really low, so I'm kinda happy thinking it's scare of me, so I get my cooler and walk back to my gate, keep my eye on this thing as it just stay far out but keeps close. What to call that, stalking. About to go into my RV with my dog, and I take one fine look. The woods from my RV at the closest point is maybe 40 to 50 feet, and I kinds feel safe, so I stare at it. MFW, I click the buttons on the flashlight and it goes to love. It has 3 settings on it: low, medium, high. This thing stands up at least, I don't know, like 8 to 9 fucking feet. I nope inside my RV, all the windows covered, and wishing I had a bigger gun. Anyways, get inside, and for the rest of the night feel my RV moving like something is pushing into it, and sound branches falling on it.
At the circus, we once hired a clown who performed under the name Malingo. I think we all knew, right from the start, that there was something wrong with Malingo, and if you're considered odd amongst our ragged crew, there is something seriously wrong. He stank, not only from the booze, which seemed to be his only intake of nutrient whatsoever, but of something sicky sweet, like a carcass left in the summer sun. And he moved rather clumsy, and not clown funny clumsy, but rigid. Both on and off the stage. From day one he kept to himself, and no one really cared to befriend him anyway. One night, he seemed more off than usual. He was mimicking the acrobats in one of his numbers. The idea was that he would use the trampoline and do a couple of flicks in the air and then crash land. During the practice sessions he had always gotten up right after the crash, since that was part of the act. But this night, in front of the audience, he didn't get up. I was the first one to reach him, since I'm always there during the clown's act. If the stench didn't tell me something were wrong, the huge gaping hole in his stomach did. It was like he had just burst open. Thankfully, I managed to get the clowns to play ambulance and carry him out before the audience realized it wasn't part of the show. I also managed to hide his wound with the help of a tablecloth we had on stage. We have a doctor in our troupe, and after examining Malingo, he said that the clown had been dead for weeks. That last trick had been too much for his decomposing body, and he had simply burst. None of us understand how this can be, but he hid his condition, if one can call it that, under it of booze and thick layers of makeup.
Hiking in a mountain with friends. Making a stop to rest. Anon says he will be heading first. We keep going shortly after. About 10 minutes, and we don't find Anon. The trail is one way, no way he could have lost. 20 minutes later, and we get worried. We shout Anon name with no answer. After getting a little derailed, I found Anon. Anon is semi-naked and is looking towards the wilderness. Anon, what the fuck are you doing? He snapped out of it and looks at me very confused. He told us that he heard someone whispering. He told us that he lost sense of time and was like in a trance state. He told us he began to feel boiling from inside and took his jacket and pants off to cool down. All of this was disregarded because Anon is known for being a pothead. Everyone just assumed that he was on drugs, and we kept going. Anon told us that he did have drugs but didn't use it. No one believes him anyway. I kinda believe him, there's lot of people who get lost and die in national parks, and I feel that if I didn't found him that moment he could have been lost too.
Reminds me of a story. 10 or so years ago. Kalamazoo, Michigan. East Michigan Street. Old paper plant Georgia Pacific had been shut down for years. Myself, a friend, and his COUSI, an autistic, sneak in to steal copper wire at night. Flashlights, but this place is run down and sketchy as fuck. Myself and friend are hard at work on doing conduit and collecting wire. His cousin, with no flashlight, is nowhere to be found. WTF, I think, this place is pitch black and a death trap, full of pitfalls and debris everywhere. So the search begins. I'm white, friend and cousin are black, and my friend is flipping out. I'm just worried the cousin is dead, and this is a crime in progress as is. So deep in the bowels of some would call a terrifying place, we find his cousin standing in the corner of the boiler room, facing wall, speaking lounges. We left safely that night and never spoke of it again. Next night we did go back to get our copper. We went back to the spot his cousin was found to look for more copper, and found the skeletal remains of about a dozen pit bulls. Odd and spooky anons. Plus how his cousin found his way with no light still baffles me.
My mom was just leaving for a political conference. 72-mile drive through the country roads. We were gonna spend the night at our summer house. On the road, after taking the ferry. No one around, no houses or cars, nothing. A small animal is about to cross the road. Mom slows down. All of a sudden about 800 of the same animals cross the road in a disturbing pace. 2 deers cross right after. We wonder why they were fleeing, so we observed. Then both me and my mom spot something up by the hill to our fight, where they were fleeing from. We see a 8 feet tall humanish figure with pointy fists, wearing nothing but leather panties. It closes in on our car, and the reflection of its eyes was bright, shining yellow. It had no hair. It did not have a mouth, nor a nose, but a huge gaping hole right under the eyes, gaping up like a gash, and was filled with tagged teeth. Only 28 feet from our car. I was car to death and doped as fuck, screamed, told my mum to drive as fuck. She rolls down the window and asks, "Do you need any help, sir?" Answer was a deep, disturbing, echoing growl. It looks like the creature is about to dash for us. Mom hits the pedal and accelerates to 100 miles per hour in a matter of 10 seconds, with our Saab 9000. I didn't sleep for months. I have no idea, 8 years later, what the figure was. I still remember it clear as day, and so does probably my mom. We sever speak of RT, but still have nightmares of the figure looking my way. So tell me, X, what the hell did we see?
I would love to hear more stories, as I got one more from my good old country Mexico. I can't confirm this, but this came from my mom. She has contact with family, so she's up to date on what happens and when is safe to visit. About a couple of years ago there was a huge party, Quince, where a girl celebrated her 15th. People were drunk and of course there were fights. Near the end they tried to find the birthday girl. She was nowhere to be found for days. Now because in some places it's so bad that we don't have normal police, we have state police, which is just military men walking around with M16s and armored vehicles. Even they are corrupted sometimes. They got involved and the kidnappers were not afraid because seriously Mexico is a fucked up country. They asked for a huge quantity amounts of pesos for a week that the family didn't know how to get the money. The week flew by, and they ended up collecting half the amount required. The extortionist called, took the half, and said that she would be home soon. 2 days later they got a box, but upon opening it he got the bottom half of the girl. There was a note attached saying that if they wanted the other half they needed to pay the rest of the money.
Be 9 years old. 4th grade. Me and my 2 friends who live near me walk home from school. Along the way we are just kicking a rock back and forth to each other and talking about video games. We go the normal route, where we walk down a fairly busy road and then cut off across the lawns of businesses and fields and playgrounds and stuff. We pass through one of the playgrounds and there's a guy, about 50 to 60 years old, looks like he's trying to fix his van. The parking lot is empty except him. Really no cars around. He sees us and starts yelling out to us. "Hey you boys, can you help me out? I need some help." We knew that this is some fishy shit, so we nope the fuck out of there. We run towards the road and take the long way home along the busy streets. A week passes. A third grader was abducted. Security footage shows it was the dude in his gray van. We talked to our teacher that day and she calls the police. Police officers and investigators pull us out of class. He takes our statements. They eventually find the guy and the little girl a month later. Yeah, this was in Anchorage, Alaska and was a pretty big deal then.
Still have nightmares about this. Grew up in a village called Am, England, better known as the Plague Village. You can read about it here. The village is surrounded by huge foothills and dense woodland. There is a particularly famous spot outside of the village down an old overgrown path called that was named by the locals the Dealth. This is where they would hold the funeral services for the plague victims during the outbreak. It's a huge strangely shaped cave-like thing. When I was younger, all my friends were deathly afraid of this place. You would hear stories about floating vicars and ghosts that would follow you home. In the daytime we would go down and explore the area surrounding it and find cow skulls on pikes littered about. One day one of my school friends suggests we man up and go can explore the Dealth. We all agree and go down about 4 p.m. with a torch. We get there and only 2 of us will actually go inside the cave. Me and my friend, 3 other of my friends wait outside. We go in, it feels horribly cold. I felt like I was being watched the whole time. We get to the end of the cave, it's not very deep. My friend finds a small crack that you can squeeze through. And starts to proceed down the narrow space with me following. All of a sudden he screams and runs at me. He drops the torch, I'm stuck in the entrance to the crack, while he trying to push his way past me in the complete darkness. We eventually get out and run out of the cave. All other friends decided to fuck off and leave us. We practically run all the way home just as the sun sets. He is crying as we reach his house. He tells me he saw a white face smiling at him in that narrow crack and that it was coming towards him. Safe to say we never went down there again.
Yeah, but I can hardly remember now. Find book in grandfather's bookcase one morning while I was staying at his home for the summer. Much older than the rest, leathery beat-up cover. It had no title, author, or distinguishing marks on the outside. Decided to flip through it. Read through the first page. By the time I had flipped to the second, I found I could no longer remember the contents of the first. I turned back and reread it, only to turn to page 2 again with the same results. Little weirded out, decide to just read and not care about the previous pages. On about the 7th page my grandfather came into the room and upon seeing the book in my hands, yelled at me to get out of his study and that he'd been looking for me all day and then snatched the book away. This shocked me at the time because my grandfather was a very quiet and soft-spoken man. He'd only yelled at me once before, years ago, and I was being a little cunt and deserved it. Anyways, I walk out to the kitchen and find that it's nearly 6 p.m. This really startles me, as I swear I was only in his study for no less than 15 minutes and I went in right around 8 to 9 a.m. I can no longer remember any contents of the book and my grandfather has since hidden it.
Working at a convenience store. A few miles from the city limits. Near the highway. But still pretty urban. You get the idea. Graveyard shift. 2 a.m. Only the crazies come out this late. After not getting any customers for my whole shift. A beat-up minivan rolls into the parking lot. Out steps. And I shit you not. The biggest drag queen I have ever seen. Dude / it has to be at least 6'6". Maybe taller but scrawny as a scarecrow. Looking at him walk unnerving itself, but then he comes in. This guy was not fooling anyone. He made Caitlyn Jenner pass for cover girl. Too much makeup that looked clownish, dress that was too tight. Feet the size of dinner plates crammed into sandals and a bugle that was practically doing the Wilhelm scream in his pants. This Stephen King creation is lumbering around. Hunched over pawing through stuff but his way to obviously looking me up and down. We got a .357 revolver and a blackjack under the counter, but airplanes were needed to take down Kong. He lumbers out back to his minivan and talks to somebody in the driver's seat. Then daddy long legs his way back in. Starts buying random things that have no relation to each other. A toolbox. A jug of water. A radio. All heavy stuff he's clearly struggling with. Pays for it all. Asks if he could get some help bringing it out to the van. Say no. I can't leave the counter. Aw come on. Please. It just take a minute nope. Well the service here is just shit. I'd like to speak to somebody in charge. Call the store number. I don't give a fuck. Watch him struggle with all the heavy shit. And walk out into the night. Soon after I hear the van pull out and see its lights out the store window. 10 minutes of silence. When I hear a tapping on the window which is adjacent to the counter. It's the same guy. Peering in and smiling like the fucking Joker. Literally fall out of my chair. Oh sweetheart, I didn't mean to scare you. But my friend just left for an emergency and I had to stay here, could you come out so I feel safer? Grab the blackjack. Tell him to get the fuck out of here or I'm going to run him over with my car. His face gets super close to the window. I see him breathing on it. It's like a transvestite Jurassic Park. He gives me the very definition of a death stare for a solid 15 seconds. Then in a very masculine clear tone, says "Yeah, we're gonna die tonight." Punches the window and walks away. Spend the rest of the night drowning in coffee and chain smoking cigarettes. Looking over my should with a gun and blackjack near me until dawn. Dawn comes, I go out to my car. All the shit he bought is in a pile to the side of the store. Like he never needed it and discarded it. Tell my friend who works at a Dunkin' Donuts a mile up the road about it. He worked that night too by pure coincidence. Says around that same time a minivan came in his parking lot. Parked. Waited for a half hour without the driver getting out of the car and then headed back in the direction it came from.
I live in this shitty little one-bedroom apartment. I have 2 cats, so my blinds are fucked up beyond repair. I'm going to have to buy a new set for every window and door in the place. I'm a poor fag, so I don't actually own a bed, and my roommate sleeps on the only couch. My makeshift bed is right below the 2 windows in the bedroom, and they're always smudged, even after I clean them, inside and out. They face the highway outside, and I am conveniently placed close enough to a streetlight to receive its eerie burnt orange lighting, but not close enough for it to function as a valid light source. I sit up late at night on my computer, leaning against the wall just beside the aforementioned windows, doing whatever, and every so often, I have the strangest feeling that if I turn my head ever so slightly, I will see something looking in my window at me. My imagination loves to run wild with me, sending me into near panic attacks, irrational as they all are, ending only when I can assure myself that my window is, in fact, devoid of anything unusual. You can imagine my surprise when one night, I turned my head just a tiny fraction to catch a glimpse of my window out of the corner of my eye, and saw it. Contorted features, hideously amused expression, wrinkled skin and wide sunken eyes that reflected no light at all. It was hard to see the features in detail, since it was just out of clear sight, and I sat there for a moment, unsure if I should turn my head further to confirm this apparition, and then I blinked, and it was gone. I'm still not sure if I truly did see the thing, or if it was just a product of late-night paranoia and junk food. But I'm less inclined to look out my window at night now, just in case it's there again, and catches me looking. I get the feeling that it wouldn't like that at all.
Hey X, this literally just happened. Not in any way paranormal, but still brick shitting to me. Live in quintessential sitcom-esque suburban neighborhood. Cloudy, foggy, wet evening when sun is still up, but is about to set. Warm enough to leave the window to my house open. I am watching random shit on TV. At some point, hear weird as fuck hissing sound coming from outside. Slight nope, continue watching TV. About 30 seconds later hear it again, closer and more clearly. Seems to be coming right out of the sky. Elevated nope, but gather the fortitude to go outside and look around. Inspect area around front yard, but don't see anything. Hear hissing a third time. Look behind house. Giant fucking red leering face floating in the sky in the woods behind my house. Has huge neatly arranged teeth forming a wicked smile and slanted eyes, overall resembling some tribal demon mask. Somehow illuminated from within, and then suddenly goes dark. Left with dark roundish thing bigger than a house floating in the sky. At this point my legs are trembling from the shock, and I can barely stand. After about 10 seconds of utter disbelief it hits me that what I'm looking at is just a low-flying hot air balloon. MFW, some asshole and fiendishly detailed a hot air balloon is taking the time to fly barely 300 feet up just to fuck with people who may happen to spot him. The hissing sound I was hearing was just a faggot using his gas burner, which also illuminates the balloon from within. Promptly overcome with the urge to cuss the asshole out, but decide instead to call the cops on him. I was pretty sure flying that low was illegal as shit. After I call them, I never hear of anything about this again, and the balloon cleared the neighborhood completely. Pace around my yard a bit, and then go back inside. This just happened barely an hour ago. If they catch this guy and report about it in the local news, I will update you guys. I still can't believe I fucking fell for this shit.
I grew up in northern Sweden around Kiruna. Mother is a Sami, so there was a lot of pagan influence that was a part of my life and still is. I've moved down south from Kiruna since, but the story stems from when I was around 20 years old. Little brother of 16 years tells me him and his friends found a dead animal in a frozen lake. Naturally, this isn't too uncommon. Sometimes foxes do fall into or traverse the lake. It gets hypothermia and the lake freezes around it, encasing it in ice. Retard and co. wants me to come over with a saw, some chisels and a hammer, because they want to take it out of the ice for bragging tights. Halfway there my little brother calls me and tells me to come pick them up. Yeah sure, but what about the fox? Something took the fox. By the time I get there, I go have a look at where the fox supposedly had been. There were some cracks on the top of the ice, but it hadn't been broken. But you could tell that there was a hollow space where the fox was meant to be. My guess is that something from below the ice had snatched it. Had me fucked up.
Be a kid living in Western Canada, make friends with a kid named Ryan. We would hang out for days on end and have sleepovers at his house. Only rule was we couldn't go upstairs, so we hung out in the basement playing SNES and NES games. One day he invites me to go camping with him and his father. Spend the days doing cool shit like riding his little 50cc dirt bike, swimming in the lake, throwing stones at squirrels. One night his dad starts to get drunk. He was always a pretty nice guy, but rough around the edges. Starts talking nonsense about his brother being in the woods. Gets even more drunk. Now he's getting violent and unpredictable. Builds a huge fire to illuminate the woods around us. He's convinced that there's someone out there fucking with us. Tells us to go into the tent and go to sleep. We lay there listening to him losing his goddamn mind to whatever he thinks is out there. Fire is getting bigger. Suddenly hear banging. Ryan always had a stash of small Chinese firecrackers. It could have been those, but I couldn't tell. He proceeds to continue this insane shit all night. Eventually we fall asleep. Wake up. His dad is in a hurry to leave. Now apparently sober. We ride in the camper talking about how much fun we had and don't mention the last night. Get back to town. His dad sends me home. Ask Ryan if he wants to hang out. He says we can't anymore because his dad said so. Convince him to come play elsewhere so his dad wouldn't know. His dad finds us. Violently grabs Ryan and leaves, cursing at me. The next day Ryan isn't at school. Find out that they had suddenly moved away. I'm not sure what the fuck happened that night, but Ryan was a true bro.
So, has anyone thought about how Portal is a giant allusion to Purgatory? There is, seemingly, no reason to be putting Chell through these horrible experiments. Is for GLaDOS sadistic pleasure. But what if it's really a test? Not a scientific test, but a test of character and determination as to redeem oneself. Perhaps GLaDOS taunts of all your other friends couldn't come either, because you don't have any other friends, because of how unlikable you are. It says so right here in your personnel file. Unlikable. Liked by no one. A bitter unlikable loner whose passing shall not be mourned. It also says you were adopted. So that's funny too. Isn't just pointless mocking, but a reminder of Chell's former life. It's also heavily implied that GLaDOS could possibly be a much more knowing being as some kind of tester for Purgatory. Quotes like, speaking of curiosity, you're curious about what happens after you die, right? Guess what? I know. Quotes like this have a much more significant meaning when thought of in this context. I feel sorry for you, really. Because you're not even in the right place. This is your fault. It didn't have to be like this. You're not a good person, you know that, right? Good people don't end up here.
I love the snow. I love how all life seems to be buried, while still letting their ghost-like images show from beneath a cold blanket. I love it when everything is buried under a layer of soft, white powder that kills the plants beneath it. I love watching the snow fall languidly, slowly, forever freezing the animals, to never wake up from their comfortable sleep. To watch it lazily float down from the sky in the fading light is simply magical. It's wonderful to see all life just seems to stop, just to make an undisturbed coat of small ice crystals. But even better, and this is my favorite part, is that anything that does still move shows me everything about them. They leave behind distinct tracks in the white snow, showing if they move on 2 legs or 4, if they're with anybody, how big or heavy they are, what sort of stride they're moving in, how long ago they passed by, etc., etc. I like to follow sometimes, because the only animals that can move around in this weather are warm-blooded. There's something very fulfilling about warmth in the cold, like drinking hot cocoa, there's just something intrinsically delicious about it. And even though the warm blood might melt some of the snow, it will still stain some of the white and ice, brilliant red. It looks so stark. Simply breathtaking. The best part is, the snow makes things so quiet. It absorbs sound, you see. So I can follow you, by stepping in your tracks and you wouldn't notice a thing until I'm right on you. Isn't that neat? It's even easier, if the wind's blowing. I love the snow.
Be driving home from a late shift at work. Moon is out, still a very dark night. Live roughly 30 miles outside of town with my cousin. Driving along the interstate for some of the trip. Take my Tom and start the last part of the drive. 12 miles of dirt road that leads back into the woods, only have 2 neighbors who live right next to the road I am on. No one for 12 miles. I am about halfway home when I come around a bend, going maybe 35, and I see some bright object crossing the road. Swerve just enough to avoid hitting it. Have no idea what it is. Was very small. Replay making that turn and seeing the object a couple of times in my head, get curious and turn around. Come around the corner and see the object resting on the opposite side of the road totally. It's a toy. I get out and approach the toy. The forest is totally dark and totally quiet. Still about 5 miles from home. 7 miles from the main road and nearest neighbor. It is a plastic toy train, just the engine portion of a train. I play with the wheels and wonder how it got out here. Turn the toy over and see a dial. Give it a twist. It's a wind-up toy. Remember that this was rolling across the street. I drop the toy and begin to walk backwards to my car, too scared to turn around. Ass bumps into the door. The door rocks, bumps into something and then settles. Something is blocking the door. Before I can turn around to investigate, hear something year off down the road, plodding like it's on all fours, turn and see nothing. Get in my car and haul ass home. Never saw that toy again. My cousin believes me cause he sees weird shit.
Be asleep. Dreaming about talking to a guy with no face out my window. I can see his features move under his skin, turns out he has a face and it's covered in skin. Wake up sitting up in bed, the exact same position I was dreaming about, talking in, gesturing with my hands, facing the window, and smiling. I was in the middle of a sentence. What the fuck was I talking to? Nope, all the way down the steps and watch Family Guy until morning. I can still see his toothy grin form underneath his flesh. I live on the 2nd story.
B9. Playing in front yard while big brother is inside sleeping. Waiting for dad to come home. Truck pulls up, window rolls down. 40-ish looking guy inside smiles at me. Hey Anon, how are you? He called me by my name. I ask him how he knows my name. I'm a friend of your dad's, he asked me to watch you. Ask him if he's a policeman too. He looks at me wide-eyed for a second, then asks me if my dad is a cop. Say yeah, tell him me and my brother are waiting for him. Guy speeds off. Dad comes home 20 minutes later. Tell him what happened. Describe the guy in his truck. Has me ride around with him looking for the guy. No luck. Come home and dad yells at my brother for not watching me. Ends up adopting a German Shepherd. Never caught the guy.
I suck at writing these, but I guess can try. Be me 78-year-old. Live in a small town that used to be thriving with trains and stuff. My grandpa was a mechanic. He fixed both the trams and rails. My family says I act a lot like my grandpa. The same tastes, posture, gestures, etc. I couldn't have teamed this from him. He died when I was 2, and by that time he had Alzheimer. I sometimes had strange memories when I visited the train station and found stuff or looked at the rails in certain angles. Somehow knew the code of the train tracks and routes. I remember that I somehow was familiar with trains loading people. People were dressed in the proper attire and such. One time I found a strange piece. I have a sudden vision of people screaming and a train derailing Then more screams, but these were joyful. Another time I found a bullet casing and I remember screaming and gunshots. I stopped trying to remember stuff like that. In current day I can't replicate it. A few years ago I discovered that many years ago, a train loaded with gold bars derailed and dropped its cargo and people in it. Everyone rushed to grab the gold and take it home. Soon after, federal soldiers were dispatched to my town. They weren't playing around, they started shooting anyone that got close to the train wreck. And there are more stories related to that train station, albeit more short and simple.
I've had some bad ones. Wake up in the middle of the night. Can't move. There's a conversation going on in my room. Too scared to open eyes. Voices are talking about ghosts. I'm still scared but beginning to drift back to sleep. Suddenly I hear, "What about you, Anon? Do you believe in ghosts? Why don't you open your eyes and find out?" At this point I'm shitting myself with fear. Voices start to giggle softly as I lose consciousness. I think I got no scared that I fainted while I was paralyzed. I had experienced sleep paralysis before, but it was the first time I had hallucinations. I was young too and didn't understand what was happening. It was horrible.
Everyone here loves Courage, but who exactly is he? He's a scared dog that does whatever he can to protect his home, nowhere. Where is nowhere? Is it the place where there is nothing, no one, no hope? Hell? Courage protects his home and makes sure no one harms Muriel. His master sits in his chair and hates everything and everyone. Whenever something evil comes to attack or rule over nowhere, Courage fights back, keeping Muriel safe and Eustace's home from being destroyed. Muriel always sees a new head on Courage whenever something evil comes to warn her, giving him multiple heads. Courage will forever stay in hell, nowhere, to protect his home, keep Muriel, humanity, safe from the evils of hell, like whack, greed, naughty FRED, murder, cats hate, and etc. His master Satan, Eustace, will rule over and hate all that is hell, nowhere. He is stuck in the middle of hell and loves his home. He is Cerberus, our courageous cowardly dog.
Not my story, something a Native American guy posted a while ago, but it's some of the creepiest shit I've ever heard. My dad picks me up from school in his pickup truck after he got off work one winter's night. We were driving on a long stretch of road that goes through the woods. It's pitch black outside. The truck radio didn't work, so I was just sitting staring straight out at the road, getting hypnotized by the passing trees. Suddenly started to get an intense sensation that something is watching me through the window to my right. I started to turn my head to see what it is when my dad yells, "Don't look." Immediately start to hear tapping on the window right next to my face. Heart stops. Only time I ever saw fear on my dad's face. He started to pray loudly in Navajo. Stare straight ahead. Heart pounding. Not daring to look out the window. Suddenly the truck dips as a weight falls into the bed. Whatever the fuck this thing is in the back right behind my head. Start to hear tapping on the window behind me. My father makes me look at him as he continues to pray. Close my eyes tight and wish for it to be over. After a few endless minutes the truck dips again and the tapping stops. My father says, "Tomorrow we will ask your grandfather to say a prayer, so the evil will forget our faces," in English to Navajo equivalent. Drive home and lie awake in bed all night. Father and I never talk about it again.
Sorry, I'm using an app where the formatting always gets flicked up, no matter what I do. I'll try to fix it. Working as a cashier in San Fran for a couple years, trying to get my life back together. Raggedy Man walks in with a guitar. I feel like he's dangerous, so I decide to let him shoplift. He calls me brother and walks out, thanking me. I take the heat from my boss later. I learned 3 months later that was Charles Manson.
Don't stop reading this. Don't look away. You see. My darling, I am watching you, not where you would find me, so don't look around. Don't look away from your computer screen. I've known you for such a long time. Remember when you would crawl into your parents' bed at night? That wasn't your mom you cuddled up to, my love. And when you got too old to sleep with me, I would go to your bed instead. I still do from time to time when I'm messing you. I make sure you don't remember those nightmares. The ones where you open your eyes and see what's left of mine staring back at you. The skin is starting to grow over them, but I can still see that beautiful look of terror on your face. I can still see the smell of my rot overwhelm you. My flesh tingles when you feel my damp, bony hand covering your mouth while the other strokes your cheek. Don't worry, I won't leave you. In fact, I'm watching you right now. Don't look away from the screen, my dear, I love staring into your eyes.
Not supernatural but still. I was 18 living on my own. Bad neighborhood. Smoking cigarette from my window on the 4th floor, about 2 a.m. I hear a girl crying and being dragged by her hand by a man. She's about 8. She keeps yelling, "Dad, Dad." It doesn't faze me, neighborhood was bad, plenty of people abuse their kids. The guy keeps pulling on her arm to follow him. He's audibly very angry, yelling back at the girl to shut up. They enter an apartment building almost parallel to mine. As soon as they enter the building, the girl starts screaming very loudly. I still don't think anything of it. 2 days later I come home and police everywhere. Turns out the man wasn't her father, he raped and killed her. The landlord got bothered by the smell and walked into her dismembered body.
This is the tale of 2 boys in the woods. It's not my own tale, but it's a true tale. Some would say, no. Not true, that's not how it happened. But it's how the other guy, the one who lived, explained it. They had been visiting a small place in Norway, about 350 people lived there at the time. I lived there. They were city boys, wanted to see the country, the woods, and enjoy a bit of beer and women. At one point a third guy had joined them in their endeavor to enjoy themselves. Later it was told that none of them knew who he was or where he'd come from, just that it felt right to have him there, like they had been missing a piece of a puzzle and that the guy was that piece. Let us call the 2 friends Jair and John, and the third guy who no one remembers even seeing anymore for Seb. John began feeling ill one night. He told Jair that Seb was acting all weird and that he felt sick being near him. Jair laughed it off, but John became more reclusive and apparently refused to have Seb there anymore. Jair and John fought that day, and Jair told John to stay in the cabin and be sick all he wanted because Jair was heading out to drink. However, while Jair was drinking, John joined him. It was about 27 below Celsius, Amerifags, and icy that day. John explained he didn't want to sit at home, that he was sorry for his behavior. When they left, John didn't get his jacket back, claiming he was fine without it. Now this is where it gets a bit tricky. You see, Jair swore John came home with him, that they shared a meal and that John told Jair that Seb had left. Jair thought nothing of it until he was woken by a knocking at the cabin door. It was the cops telling him that John had been found floating under the ice under the bridge and that his clothing had been found neatly folded in a crossing by a taxi driver, his shoes on top. Apparently John had been dead for about 12 hours, while Jair knew he had spent time with John within that time range and told the police so. The police figured he was in shock, denial, that sort of thing. But Jair was adamant. There were 2 plates on the table and John's bed had been slept in. But when Jair told them about Seb, they became very serious and began asking questions about Seb, how he spoke, how he walked and talked, that sort of thing. Jair willingly explained everything about Seb and was carted off to the mental hospital, charged for murder, but apparently too sick to stand trial. If I think back to that night, it snowed heavily. And the taxi driver found the clothing free of snow, neatly folded. If John died that early, there is no way those clothes wouldn't be covered with snow and impossible to see. So, what's your guess? A skinwalker seemingly gliding into their friendship seamlessly? Or just schizophrenia? Just.
In 1983, a team of deeply pious scientists conducted a radical experiment in an undisclosed facility. The scientists had theorized that a human without access to any senses or ways to perceive stimuli would be able to perceive the presence of God. They believed that the 5 senses clouded our awareness of eternity, and without them, a human could actually establish contact with God by thought. An elderly man who claimed to have nothing left to live for was the only test subject to volunteer. To purge him of all his senses, the scientists performed a complex operation in which every sensory nerve connection to the brain was surgically severed. Although the test subject retained full muscular function, he could not see, hear, taste, smell, or feel. With no possible way to communicate with, or even sense the outside world, he was alone with his thoughts. Scientists monitored him as he spoke aloud about his state of mind in jumbled slurred sentences that he couldn't even hear. After 4 days, the man claimed to be hearing hushed unintelligible voices in his head. Assuming it was an onset of psychosis, the scientists paid little attention to the man's concerns. 2 days later, the man cried that he could hear his dead wife speaking with him, and even more, he could communicate back. The scientists were intrigued, but were not convinced until the subject started naming dead relatives of the scientists. He repeated personal information to the scientists that only their dead spouses and parents would have known. At this point, a sizable portion of scientists left the study. After a week of conversing with the deceased through his thoughts, the subject became distressed, saying the voices were overwhelming. In every waking moment, his consciousness was bombarded by hundreds of voices that refused to leave him alone. He frequently threw himself against the wall, trying to elicit a pain response. He begged the scientists for sedatives, so he could escape the voices by sleeping. This tactic worked for 3 days, until he started having severe night terrors. The subject repeatedly said that he could see and hear the deceased in his dreams. Only a day later, the subject began to scream and claw at his non-functional eyes, hoping to sense something in the physical world. The hysterical subject now said the voices of the dead were deafening and hostile, speaking of hell and the end of the world. At one point, he yelled no heaven, no forgiveness degrees for 5 hours straight. He continually begged to be killed, but the scientists were convinced that he was close to establishing contact with God. After another day, the subject could no longer form coherent sentences. Seemingly mad, he started to bite off chunks of flesh from his arm. The scientists rushed into the test chamber and restrained him to a table so he could not kill himself. After a few hours of being tied down, the subject halted his struggling and screaming. He stared blankly at the ceiling as teardrops silently streaked across his face. For 2 weeks, the subject had to be manually rehydrated due to the constant crying. Eventually, he turned his head and, despite his blindness, made focused eye contact with the scientists for the first time in this study. He whispered I've spoken with God, and he has abandoned us, and his vital signs stopped. There was no apparent cause of death.
I have one quite similar to this. Me, aged 9 to 10. Parents divorced since I was 3. Staying with my dad at weekend, his house was at least 5 miles from any real town city. Land was quite large, but he didn't own much of it, played on it nevertheless. Large foresty area behind house, which the window in my room was facing. Looking through photo album my dad had. Mostly family photos, birthdays, Christmases etc. Towards the end, the pictures are of the house, taken from the back of the house. Each one closer than the one before. Several are of me playing in the forest, one clearly taken from behind a tree no more than 50 meters away from where I was. Wasn't too fussed, since I assumed it was my dad. Asked him why he took them, because they were different to the rest of the pictures. He seemed bewildered, and began flicking through. I realized I hadn't looked through all of them, but he was nearing towards the final pages, the ones I hadn't seen. Noticed color drain from his face on the penultimate page. Clearly nervous about turning the page. Finally does, and I notice him shiver. Closes album and packs a bag for me and him. We leave the house and only returned a few times before putting it up for sale. Reported it to the police, but there was little they could do. Skip like 5 years. Ask him what was on the final pages. He is clearly distressed, and he sits me down. Tells me that they were of me asleep, taken directly by my bedside. But the last picture was a picture of my window, taken from inside my room. Apparently several people were stood outside my room with masks on, looking directly at the camera. I still don't understand why I didn't wake up whilst a person was in my room, since I am usually a light sleeper. But I wasn't able to sleep well for the next few months without making sure the window was locked and the curtains were drawn.
Reminds me of something I did once. Exploring an old factory. Bit boring really, all things of interest or value had been removed years ago. About to leave when I hear noises behind me. I am not alone. At the time, I was wearing a ski mask and goggles. Sounds strange, but it stops my face from being seen by any camera, and it keeps dust and shit out of my hair, face, eyes. I was also wearing a jacket, pants, boots and gloves, so essentially you couldn't see any of my skin. Anyway. Briefly shit myself thinking it's security or spoopy skeletons. Then I hear their voices. Bill, I really don't wanna go in there. Come on honey, just for 5 minutes. But it's so flicking creepy. We'll be fine. Realize that some guy has taken his reluctant girlfriend urbexing. Devious plan comes to mind. As quietly as I can, stash my bag behind a pile of cardboard boxes nearby. Strike the kind of pose that a shop mannequin would be in. Remain as still as possible. After about 2 minutes of waiting, they find me. The guy jumps back, the girl screams. Relax honey, it's just a mannequin. Bill, why the fuck is there a mannequin in a factory? People probably dump stuff here all the time. Bill moves slightly ahead, but the girl comes closer to me. It's so fucking creepy, she says again, looking up at me. Suddenly I turn my head, so I'm looking right at her. If you think I'm creepy, you should see the other guy. She lets out a scream, as though she's being fucked by a red-hot iron dick. Bill yells too. Wait until I can't hear them running anymore. Leave factory and drive home laughing. For some reason it really reminded me of that last scene in Toy Story, where Woody scares Sid by talking to him.
This is a former coworker's story. It did not happen to me, so I can only say that during the 2 years I worked closely with this guy and talked a lot with him, he is an honest man, is not delusional, was not trolling me, and is still uneasy about this event, and I, never one to rush to believe this man is not lying. Be this man, Frank. First night in old house he just bought, and finally got all moved into. Lives alone. Be asleep, no lights on. Wake up because someone or something is touching his foot. Still half asleep, begin to comprehend. That's fingers. That's a kicking hand probing around at my legs. Quickly begin to clear head from sleep, and realize this is not a dream, and this is kicked. Doesn't believe in X must be a burglar murderer pervert. Determined, fight or flight mode, think to self, I'm going to grab this fucker. Hand keeps probing, grabbing, working its way up the body. Wait for it. JPG. Hand touches face. Bite it hard. Hold bite. Reach out and turn on nightstand light. Get ready to attack. Nothing there. He was forever scared in that house, and eventually moved out because of it.
I thought it was just me. In my pregnancy I had strange cravings, I wanted raw meat, I craved drugs and alcohol, and I would take them whenever I could. I had headaches that would leave me incapable, but I didn't stop myself from taking the strongest painkillers I could, even though I knew they could kill the life inside of me. I lost my child because of this, at least that's what I thought. I had a dream about a fire. Blood and bone and screams, and I woke up in the middle of the night, my sheet soaked in blood and lumps of my unborn child. My stomach felt as though it was squirming. I was rushed to the hospital. They scanned what was left of my bump, and they said I was still pregnant, but the trauma of a miscarriage so late in the pregnancy would have had a terrible effect on both me and the other baby. They kept me in for a time. I only had a few weeks left. The baby came early and the labor was easy for me. As I held my new, healthy, perfect baby girl, I felt a little sad that I wasn't strong enough to keep her twin. But my tears stopped when she smiled. We kept her in our room in a Moses basket, and she barely kept us awake with crying and was easy to feed. At night I would wake up, hearing a baby screaming as if it were in pain, only to see her asleep, warm and safe in her basket. When I closed my eyes again I saw soft pink creatures, like sea creatures, nestled together. Then a darkened one opened its terrible eyes and released its vicious claws, tearing its companion and sinking pointed sharp black teeth into it, filling my vision with blood and my ears with the sound of baby screams. I went to the doctor. He said it was guilt. I began to feel paranoid that everything would hurt my baby. I kept her closer to my bed in her basket. I dreamt my husband was jealous of the bond with my baby, and that he was pulling her blankets from her in the night as a cruel attempt to make me feel worse. The doctor said this was antenatal depression. It would go away. He said I began to dream that she, as only 2 weeks old, would sit up in her basket and look at us both with the same terrible soulless eyes and bare her disgusting teeth. When I woke up to see her, she was still so innocent, asleep. I told my husband I didn't want her in the room anymore. She was old enough to sleep on her own. She wasn't, and she cried even night she wasn't with me. But when she finally slept from exhaustion, I would sleep, and I would dream I saw her, only 6 weeks old, on her feet, at the bedroom door, her eyes like reflectors in the dark, taking in any light they could to see her way. Then they met mine, and I saw those terrible teeth. I woke up when she leapt. It was still dark. Quiet. I left the bed and checked on her. She was no monster. She was breathing calmly in her cot. I pulled a blanket up over her belly. She must have wiggled out. Then I went back to bed. They dragged me out of my house the next day. The neighbors had heard me screaming for my life, and the baby screaming too. They found me in the nursery, a knife in one hand, curled in the corner, covered in my own and my husband's blood. I told them they need to kill the baby. She killed her twin inside me. She killed her father. She was a monster and she was going to kill me. They put me in a maximum security asylum, but I know she'll find her way in. She'll find me.
Abandoned farm. In the middle of England there is a farm owned by a man called John Glass. If you are lucky enough to find this farm, John will happily take you to see his animals and will treat you with utter kindness. He will keep you there until nightfall, when he insists you must stay over and drive back in the morning. Not wanting to disrespect this old man, you agree and settle down for the night in cozy room. In the morning you will wake up on a mattress-less bed. The room will be dirty, smelly and old. The rest of the farm will too, with a few rotting animal carcasses in the fields. There will be no sound except for loud squealing sounds. You will find that the sounds are coming from a run-down barn, and if you dare to peek inside you will see yourself bound and gagged. You will watch John Glass torture you in ways you couldn't even imagine. Then, you will wake up in your own bed with no memo of the day before. You will search for an abandoned farm. As soon as you see it, you will decide to move there and renovate it. You will forget about your old life. A year later, an unsuspecting traveler will come to your farm. You will happily take them to see your animals and treat them with utter kindness. Be me at 15. 2008. Driving with Dad through Outback. Driving the Plenty Donahue Highway between the Stewart Highway in the Northern Territory and Boolia in Western Queensland. Minus 700 kilometers unsealed road. See no one but a few trucks, maybe 3 in total the whole time. Blew 2 tires about 450 kilometers in and didn't have any more spares, so had to drop our speed by a lot just to be safe. As a result, end up taking much longer to drive the length of this road than we otherwise would have. For background, there is a myth legend in the Boolia area of this so-called Min light that harasses and follows travelers and tries to entice them to leave the road at night and follow it out into the desert. We'd traveled in the area plenty of times before and had never seen it, so we weren't really thinking about it. Be about 8:30 p.m, pretty dark, night sky out there was amazing BTW, any Australians here I highly recommend. Driving along at about 50 to 60 kilometers per hour to prevent any risk of another tire blowing. Light flashes in front of us like a shooting star, but right in front of the windshield. Dad and I WTF but keep on driving. Happens a few more times. Starts to hang around a bit longer each time. At one point it hovered in front of us for about 30 seconds. Haha, must be the Min Dad. I'm feeling a little on edge because a light appearing out of nowhere and hovering in front of the car is freaky as fuck. Dad doesn't give a fuck. He starts making verbal challenges to the light. He challenges it to try and lead him off the road. Light disappears. It appears again about 15 minutes later and hovers in front of the car again. Dad stops the car and gets out. The light starts moving off the road and stops about 10 meters off the road and hovers. Dad starts challenging the light again. Is that the best you've got? Picks up a rock and throws it at the light. All the while I'm sitting in the car not knowing whether to shit myself with fear or piss myself laughing at my dad fighting with a light. After a few seconds the light disappears. At this point we're pretty hungry, so we stay there for about half an hour or so and make something to eat. Every 5 minutes Dad starts yelling out for the light. Bring it on. I'm waiting. The light never comes back the whole time back. Too long didn't read. My dad had a fight with a paranormal light myth and won. Be 5th grade me was the weird kid. Had supernaturally great luck at predicting the future. Fancied myself a psychic, was very dramatic and cringy about it. Had this cringy act where I told people, who didn't ask shit, about my dreams. I dreamt that someone here gets really sick today. Later that evening someone does barfs in class, surprisingly good at it, like 3/4 accuracy rate. Get a following, which I realized later in life was just people who came to gawk at my cringiness. One night I get a really violent dream. Adult man gets out of bed, wife is sleeping, gets knife from kitchen, turns off every light in house. Goes to kid's room, stabs one sleeping son on neck, and then stabs the other on neck. Returns to bedroom where wife is still sleeping, slices her neck too. Gets into bathtub, slices his neck. The dream wakes me up, it's 4 a.m. That morning in school, I don't talk about my dreams, never do so after that, no one asks shit. A few days later, principal comes to class, with the guidance counselor alongside. Tells class that one of the kids from the class hasn't been coming because he and his brother died. Call for class drama counseling, psychological help. Best friend of the lad asks how they died. Counselor only answers in their sleep. Get a gut feeling that I already know what happened. I do end up finding out the truth later on in high school. Googled the dead kid's name. Murder-suicide, father kills 2 children and wife and then himself. The only sources don't mention any weapon or anything relating to the tub. Still do get predictions in my dreams but nothing on that scale. Last night I thought it was just going to be like every other before it, but I was dead wrong. As I slept I had faded into a lucid dream, different than others I've had before. It started off with me waking up in the middle of the night, which I do a lot, so I had thought it was real at first. But then I noticed my ceiling fan was upside down on my floor and my windows were made of stained glass. So, then was when I knew it was a dream. Strange thing is, I didn't wake up once I knew it was one. I walked out of my room and into the nearby kitchen. I pondered what would happen. I never experienced a dream like this before. I switched my hall light on. Everything looked the same as it did in reality, except for a few oddities, but other than that everything was normal. Until I wandered into my bathroom. As I approached the door, as it felt as if I had to pee badly, I heard something inside. It sounded like a low breathing noise. Perhaps my dream roommate was inside, so I knocked. No answer. I reached for the knob and as I did, I felt slight electricity build up inside my hand. I then grabbed it firmly and tried to turn it, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I creaked the door slightly open to find a dark bathroom, and a nose-wrinkling stench flew out of the inside. I cringed at the odor but managed to open the door fully. No one was inside. I was greatly relieved and made my way inside to turn on the light switch so I could see, but it wouldn't turn on. Strangely, I flipped it a few times, but to no avail. That stench began to get stronger for some weird reason. As I turned around to look at my surroundings, I noticed something in the mirror in corner of my eye. Then turned back to see what it was. I wish I hadn't. I saw myself in my regular sleeping pants and plain t-shirt, but my whole lower jaw was ripped off. It took me a minute before I realized this, then I began to panic. My heart racing, I tried to run out of the room, but I was frozen in complete fear. Kilowatt's voice didn't work either. I began to hear a ringing in my ears and a faint whisper that said something like bathtub. I looked over to the tub in the dark room and saw my roommate, his torso slit open from his collarbone down to his navel. I looked back at the mirror and saw the creepiest, most soulless eyes looking back at me. They were glowing this yellowish color. The sight of these eyes jerked my body up enough to wake up, and boy did I. My roommate tried to calm me down, as I was screaming pretty damn loud. As I calmed down, I noticed the outside was dark. I had woken up in the middle of the night, again. I couldn't sleep all night after that and probably won't tonight. Creepy deep web stories. I have a few. If y'all like this one, I'll post more. Be 2 years ago. Dicking around with Polish friend. Head onto Hidden Wiki, Anonshan, etc. On Anonshan, some dude posts a link and some Cyrillic scripey with lots of exclamation points. Luckily enough, my buddy reads some Russian. Translates it. It's up again, hurry. Fuck it, why not? Click the link. Here's what we saw. 3 dudes in military uniforms, schwan only from the neck down. Speaking excitedly and super high-pitched nervously in Russian. Friend reads Russian better than he speaks it, but he catches a few phrases. Basically these guys are scared and excited. They're getting another one. Etc. Eventually it becomes clear that they're out on the ice in some random ass lake in Siberia, ice fishing. After a few minutes of nervous chatter, fucking assault rifles start going off. Camera swings around wildly, eventually focusing on a poorly lit hole in the ice. Gurgling and splashing noises coming from it. These dudes and others are just straight pumping bursts down the hole. Eventually, after another few minutes, these dudes use long hooked poles to dig around and then heave something up. Shit you not. 20+ foot long fish like snake looking fucker, at least 3.5 feet in diameter. I'd say it was an anaconda, but it was brown, and it had really nasty, flabby fins that they grabbed and stretched out, full of sea lice and holes and shit. Big black eyes, mouth full of the gnarliest teeth I have ever seen. Huge air sacs on its underside, looked like a lungfish or some shit. Video cuts to a series of photos of the thing, better lit than the video, presumably because they're shot with flash. Mottled brown skin with plenty of blood smeared all over it from the bolts scraping the sides of the hole they pulled it out of. Any of the pictures showed what I'm guessing was the contents of its stomach, and there was all sorts of crazy shit in there. Don't go swimming in Russia. The young girl was breathing heavily, her blonde hair filthy with dirt and sweat, her eyes staring into the darkness of the old corridor, She didn't know where the others were. She had heard screams. It could have been Mike, but she couldn't tell. The naked concrete rooms and corridors distorted the voices and sounds. It was like they came from everywhere and nowhere at once, just drifting through every tunnel in the old factory and bouncing off each other like waves in a water park. Her heart was pounding hard, too hard, far too hard. She was panicking. Her attempt at calm breathing couldn't stop the quick tensions and releases. No, please, calm down. What if it hears? What if it hears the booming heartbeats? What if it comes? It was the only other thing she had heard besides the screaming. The sound of metal scraping against concrete, the most artificial sound there is, and she had heard it like it was coming from all directions, echoing through the corridors, and she had heard screams that turned into whimpering and crying, and then nothing else. Oh God, Mike. She looked in the other direction, pitch black, but far away there was a window. The weak rays of distant industrial lights filtered through dirty glass, bathing a little room in a sickly orange shine. Unnatural, human light. She felt a little jolt of hope and almost forgot about her heart that was still trying to tear her chest cavity open, hoping to escape before it was too late. She tried to stand. Her body was shaking in protest, every single muscle cramping and aching, attempting to force her down on the floor, down into a ball, crawl into mother's womb again, forget about everything, forget about the patchwork, forget about Mike and Sam and Gretchen. Just lie there until it all passed, and she woke up, but she fought back with the strength of a madman, and soon she was on her feet, trembling as she took a first, and then a second, step toward the light. Another scream rang out. She couldn't tell if it was Gretchen or Sam. They both had high voices, and the piercing shriek assaulting her ears was repeated over and over again as new cloned waves found their way to her. She started moving at a faster pace. It was every man for himself, and she could only hope that the quickly cut-off scream had bought her a few quicker steps. She heard the scraping again, and as she realized that this time the screams had already stopped, it was toying with them. There was no chance to hear it unless it wanted them to. Her heart froze. She stopped, not really knowing why, and looked back. Only darkness, only solid fucking darkness. It could already be there, could stand just outside her vision, smiling with that grotesque razor-filled mouth, picking and choosing what it liked about her, taking its time. Why the hell had they come here? What for? To prove some point? Prove that nothing goes bump in the old sweatshop factory, that the patchwork was some damn ghost story? She felt sick, but turned back to the room at the end of the corridor, 60 feet. She could do it, just don't make a sound. LT was crouching beside the entrance. The blonde was closing in. It smiled contentedly. She was beautiful. It loved her blue eyes. In fact, it loved her whole face. She was close now, perhaps a dozen steps, and she'd be inside the room. Well, no shame in having a little laugh while you're at it. The patchwork put its blade-fingered hand against the dusty old concrete and went to meet her. Clouds. Is it going to rain today? The young boy hopes not. He doesn't much like the idea of walking to school in the rain. A clap of thunder makes him sigh and walk faster along the gravel driveway, hoping that perhaps he will make it to his destination before the heavens open and coat him in water. He's never been the popular kid, really, he muses as he eyes the darkening sky suspiciously. Perhaps he should just skip school today. Nobody would even notice, probably. Heck, even his teacher rarely noticed him or talked to him. He didn't really have close friends. Maybe he should just skip school today. As the school came into view, he heard another clap of thunder and hissed in surprise and pain as he was hit on the arm with what should have been rain. He looked at it and almost stopped walking forward as he quickly realized that it was not water falling from the skies above him. He stared stupidly at the larvae-like creature that was eagerly burrowing into his forearm with sharp pincers. He somehow managed to start running, and as he looked up, another fell onto his face and dug into the skin below his eyeball. He made it to the schoolhouse and banged on the door with both fists, screaming to be let in. Then he remembered, in a last sane moment, that it was a Saturday. It wasn't long before the parasites covered him and were wriggling beneath his skin, burrowing deeper and closer to his vital organs. He was numb to the pain that should have been engulfing him, but he could feel them as they moved around inside him. One of his eyes lost vision as one of the first ones finally made it into his skull and severed the optical nerves. He sluggishly stepped away from the schoolhouse, his actions no longer truly his own. The parasites tugged at his muscles, moving them without any permission given from the boy. His legs moved in the direction of his home, where his mother and baby sister stayed during the day. He understood what the creatures wanted, knew almost exactly what they were going to do. More parasites fell from the sky in another thunderous rumble, and his body slowly trudged down the road. "Please no," he begged silently, trying as hard as he could to stop the parasites from forcing him to go. "Please? This is how it must be," the parasites replied, a chorus of voices in his head. "This is how it will be." He fell silent and watched as the puppeteers dragged his dying body to his front door and clumsily opened it. He saw his mother's face as she caught on to the fact that something was very, very wrong. He didn't try to warn her, as parasites leaped from both outside and his body onto her flesh, tearing into her with the same ferocity as they had his. He lost his remaining eyeball as his parasites began making their way to his sister's crib, but his ears caught every cry. Maybe in time, he would stop being able to hear, too. Outside, the rain continued to fall. I already posted this in an auto-saging thread. So I'll post again, be like 11 years old. In the woods with dad's .22 revolver. Setting up sticks in the creek bed mud and shooting enemy soldiers. Some guy comes down the path. "Hey kid, I betcha can't hit this can 6 times in a row. Set it up, mister. I got this." He sticks the can in the mud. "Shoot it 6 times. Look at guy expecting approval. Guy looks expressionless. Mutters, "I got you now." Reaches for me, touches my shoulder. I jerk the trigger and discharge another round. Guy immediately turns around and quickly walks away. Wonder if I did something wrong. Like, did I break a rule? Why was he so weird? Go home, eat dinner. MFW, I figured it out later. MFW, I thank MurderCube that dad's revolver holds 10 shots. (2008) Grew up poor. Have to share room with big sis. Room is tiny, so we're really bitch about having each other's stuff in our zones. She gets the huge plant leaf thing from IKEA with her allowance that she saved up. Hangs it on the wall between our beds, so it's kind of like a partition. First night it's up, I'm staring up at it from bed. Sort of at an angle, so I'm looking partially underneath it, if that makes sense. It makes a really weird shadow on the ceiling that looks like someone looking over the edge of it. It freaked me out, but I didn't say anything. Would just have gotten laughed at. Every night for like 6 months I look up at this thing and think how weird the shadow is. Can't figure out what it is, seemingly no cause for it. One night I'm looking at it and I almost convince myself I can see eyes. Almost like that reflection animal eyes have, but way duller. Actually getting kind of freaked out. Suddenly I hear from my sister's bed. "You see it too, right?" Both of us flip out and turn on the light. Of course nothing there. Take the leaf down and try to forget about it. Turns out she'd been seeing it for months. Always in the same spot, always looking down at me. At my cottage with my doggo. Phone on airplane mode cause I'm taking it chill. Relaxing by the fireplace, no one around in a 1-mile radius. I do this every month when I want to take some time off from the city and all the turmoil. I've fallen asleep, and at 1 a.m. the stationary phone starts ringing. Keep in mind that I have a super solid mind and I wouldn't get freaked out even if Bigfoot was knocking on my front door. I'm like screw that I'm too lazy to pick up. It rings for a minute straight, then it stops for 5 seconds and starts ringing again. I pick it up and immediately exclaim my discomfort. I don't even care who it is. Are you insane calling me at 1 a.m.? I hear incredibly deep breathing in the background and nothing else. I'm basically listening to an autistic fat fuck breathing deeply, trying to creep me out or just piss me off. I'm like, yeah, nice hearing from you, asshole. I'm unplugging the phone now, go fuck yourself. That's when I hear the front porch opening, and of course my hound reacts immediately. I promptly investigate. There are indeed footprints of a stranger in my front yard. My dog immediately tracks them down. At a certain point they vanish completely at the middle of my front yard. When I was a teenager had a cell phone never used number. A few months older having number man. To get a call at my fright a few times a week from a mock number. Half of the time wrote answer it to only be greeted with what sound like somebody running through woods with their phone either beside them or in pocket. This would last as long as road stay on the phone. After a month I get sick of it and start talking she. As soon as I hear raspy breathing out first I was happy it was something new then realized something was up. I keep talking shit telling whoever was on the line they were going to regret disturbing my 12 a.m. bubble baths with their stupid she. Few seconds later breathing stops and hear water running neat. Start to think whoever this wants me to be afraid. Fuck that I wilt scared of nobody. Water sounds stop and begin to hear a strange sound can't place it. Sound gets louder problem as I'm not only hearing it from the phone new but from the back pan of the house. Realize it's the back door being locked web. Get the idea to stag laughing on the phone while I grab my dad's 12 gauge. Sounds stop they stag laughing. Wasn't quite so bothered until they staged laughing then I felt doom and wanted to panic. Decide fuck it not going to be a pussy go upstairs and open the studio's window that's the only way on the roof. Get up there quietly and walk towards the backyard. See a tall guy in all black standing in the middle of the backyard with cell phone to his ear laughing. Shortly contemplate shooting them, he hangs up looks and does nothing but stare. Tell him to fuck off before I kill his silly ass. He points up and yells out run. He turns around and bolts or the woods behind my house. I stand confused and a few moments later see two more people in all black run into the woods. That ferreted me. Told my dad who was out of town he knew back that night and set up booby traps everywhere calls stop nothing has happened since. B8. Live across the street from best friend. We talk to each other on walkie-talkies every night around 10 while looking at each other with binoculars. One night talking to him a little than usual like 11 I think. His parents are out late so we could chat. We are just bullshitting. I drop my binoculars and have to find him again. While I'm looking I see someone activate their porch light on the side of their house and look around really weirdly. Oh fuck. I tell him I think someone is breaking into his house. Hear glass smash on his side of the walkie. Tell him to hide under his bed and keep his walkie on. Hear loud footsteps and stuff being thrown around. After like 10 minutes, that felt like eternity the door slams and I see the guy run away from the house. Call the police cause I don't want him to make any noise. Police show up just as his parents show up. Ask my parents about it the next day cause they were friends of his parents. Some prowler had been following kids around the neighborhood and was probably gonna abduct my friend. I'm a hero. So it was around 6 p.m. and I was there along with my co-worker named Jerry. This is a subway in a really weird part of town, so it takes a lot to faze us. We've had bricks thrown through our windows, been robbed, had all sorts of crazy schizo transients pass through, and lots of needles left in the bathrooms. But this shit was bizarre. While we were standing around there, this kid suddenly shows up. He's my blonde hair, must have been like 6 years old or something. But he has no shoes on. And all he does is peek open the door, say hi to us, then starts walking away. Jerry decides to be the one to go out and chase after him while I hold down the counter. 5 minutes or so after that, Jerry comes back and tells me what happened. He says he managed to chase the kid down to the parking lot and asked him a few more things. He didn't respond much outside of yes and no responses. Jerry asked if he was lost, he said no. Jerry asked if his parents were nearby, he said yes. Jerry asked if they knew he was out here, he said no. That was when they were interrupted by a blonde woman approaching the two out of nowhere. When the kid saw her, he suddenly got really freaked out and took off running in the other direction. So the woman stopped and started talking to Jerry, apologizing for everything and saying that she was trying to find his parents when he ran away from them. She then said her husband worked in law enforcement and was calling reinforcements, so we didn't have to worry. Jerry Rustlunda accepted this and came back inside to relay it all to me. He wasn't as suspicious about it as I was, but we moved on for the time. Around 7:30-ish, we're getting ready to close, and the same lady comes back to the store to talk to us. She apologized again for everything that happened and then said that the cops came and found the kids home. What I felt was weird was that we hadn't heard any kind of sirens or anything around this time, but she continued, talking about how it turned out that he lived with his older brother and that he slipped out of the house while his brother was making dinner. She put the quote marks on that part, as if we would know what she meant by that. I can't remember if she actually said anything about his parents or not. But she kept insisting that we shouldn't worry and that everything was okay. Jerry shrugged it all off, but it hasn't rested easy on my mind. Something felt incredibly off about that woman. My imagination runs wild thinking it was a kidnapping or some kind of child trafficking. Our subway was right nod to a Greyhound bus station, and there's been some anti-trafficking operations done from our parking lot. Maybe it's a lot of speculation on my part, but it was really weird. Okay, here's a story. Be 15. Just got my first personal .22 rifle, all mine, super proud. Little bolt thing, super accurate, loved it. Have a family friend who owns property like 10-min drive from our house. On this property is an old house. Built by homesteaders around 100 years ago, falling apart. Right next to it is a creek and a field. We used to camp on the far side of the field all the time, also would shoot using creek as a berm. One day I decide I want to go camping. Bike out there with my .22, a box of ammo and normal camping kit. Super excited, shoot like 200 rounds at cans and shit from the trash hole nearby. In the 60s someone lived on the property in a trailer and threw trash in this sinkhole type thing. Started getting dark, built a fire and busted out the harmonica to practice. One was terrible at it, but it kept my mind busy whilst relaxed. Suddenly something isn't right, I feel like I'm being watched. Hair on neck is raised, heart elevated. My mind starts racing, imagining things unseen out there. Clutching rifle and flashlight scanning the field and trees for movement, shadows playing tricks on my mind, and I'm shitting bricks. Moonless night, god damn it I want to go home now. Wish I'd brought a tent at least to hide inside. It was summer in Texas and was too hot, but I wanted that security now. Started building fire bigger. Made a torch of sorts with a stick and a torn up t-shirt I'd brought along with thoughts of making some sort of camouflage for my rifle. Darkness is giving up no secrets, but I can definitely hear something out there walking around. Didn't want to shoot because sometimes cows wander onto the property. Fuck. I never wanted this. JPG. Maybe coyotes, they're common out here. But no, not in this particular area. Too many farmers and rednecks hunt them, they avoid it. Jesus Christ, I think I hear breathing. It's kind of circling me, getting closer. Pissing pants by this point, wishing I had something big bore. This was before cell phones were inexpensive, I didn't have one. Just told my parents I was going camping, and where. Great, so they'll just find my grisly remnants tomorrow morning, after I don't come home. Sweating buckets and running out of wood, fire dying. Contemplating running for it, but the woodsman in me wouldn't leave the fire, it was too dry out there. Suddenly I hear a deep echoing bark from kind of far off. The thing circling me stops for a second. A long pause, and then another bark, closer, and the thing takes off in the direction away from me and the bark. An enormous white fluffy dog comes trotting out of the tree line. Super friendly, has a collar on that says Snowman. Snowman and I chill out for a few hours, only once he turns his head, perks his ears and growls, half barks, and then goes back to normal. Feel totally safe with Snowman there. Eventually fall asleep with the big lug next to me, hot as hell, but who gives a fuck. Next morning Snowman is gone, figure he went home after the thing buggered off for good. Go home and scrape the brick dust out of my boxers. Next day. Talking to property owner. Tell him of that night, confirm no cows were out there. Mention Snowman. He looks at me like I'm an asshole. Snowman was my dog, he was killed by a car last year. I wat hard and tell him I was serious, Snowman was real, I petted him and got covered in his white hair and everything, and he saved my skin from whatever out there wanted my nutsack for a coin purse. He doesn't believe me until I dig the shirt out of the wash and show him the hair all over it. He says it looks just like Snowman's. Every now and then I hear a bark off in the distance whilst camping there and feel warm inside. It's been happening for the past couple of months. The tapping, I mean. Every night, just as I'm about to drift off to sleep. There's the tapping. At the front door of my house, there's a small little glass window. You know the kinds that don't serve any purpose because you can't actually see through them? It's one of those. Every night there's 3 or 4 taps at that window. The first night it happened I played it off as nothing. The second night I checked. Nothing was behind the window. The third night I opened the door and no one was there. Only 2 bare footprints which disappeared the next day. The fourth night I called the police and they found nothing but the pair of footprints right outside my door. The first week turned into the second and I started getting scared. I bought a gun, I bought locks, a guard dog, and I had already gotten started on a fence in my front yard. But the tapping continued despite my security. Eventually I stopped even responding. Nothing was there but a pair of footprints. Right? All it does is tap, right? Nothing more, right? So I got used to it. It became a routine thing. Go to my room, lay on the bed, tap, 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 go to sleep. Then things began to get worrying. I would wake up and the locks lining the side of the front door would all be opened. My pistol mysteriously disappeared without a trace. The dog ran away. The fence was just gone. It was mocking me, telling me that I'm never safe, no matter what I do. So I got tired of it. So many sleepless nights were experienced during this whole ordeal. I wanted to at least trick this thing into thinking I wasn't scared of it. So when the tapping came one night, I simply got up, opened the door, and wiped away the footprints as a mocking gesture. You could say I was challenging it. And I felt good about it. I felt like I'd finally defeated the thing. I felt safe from it. It was over, right? Right? Then the next night came, and the tapping came with it. I was seething with anger. I was more irritated by its persistence than I was afraid of the possible threat. But then my blood turned cold when I heard it. The sound of the front door opening. You know those bombs the US dropped on Japan? The uranium for them was mined in Canada, in a mine on the shores of a lake in the Northwest Territories. The mining operation completely poisoned the surrounding land, and the Indian population who lives there has to deal with cancer and all sorts of diseases from the radioactive tailings. Anyway, there's an old legend that before European contact a party of Indians were rowing across the lake on their canoes. Suddenly on the shore they saw a strange village that wasn't supposed to be there, filled with many strange people. The next instant the village was on fire and all the people were burning. Then the vision was gone as quickly as it had appeared, but they passed down the story over the generations. They'd seen the vision at the future site of the uranium mine. Hunting with a buddy. We both went up on a ridge to make camp. I think the ridge is actually called Black Hills Ridge. We sat there and made a campfire, watching the surrounding areas. Suddenly, about 1 mile away, a flare pops off. We watch it fly up slowly and float for a minute as it illuminated in an orange. About 750 yards away, a green one flies up. We watch this, perplexed. About 200 meters in front of us, a white flare goes up, followed by a yellow. We yelled down to where it was, asking if they needed help. No response. So we popped a green flare. We carry them all the time. A lot of people do around here. The flares fall. And then something freaked us out. We heard a whizzing sound. And some rocks exploded. We fell to behind an overhand and waited all night in security shifts. In the morning, we went to the flare positions. In one, we found 12 spent casings of .270 and 1 in 45 ACP. In another a fire pit and rucksack. In the third, one single magazine from what I assume was a PSL. And no casings. The third was only a fire. And the spent case from the flare. I think that some people were hunting one another. I think player 4 won. I found nothing indicating he lost or won. But I'm assuming he actually used a bow. as I found only 3 ammunition types. Human hunters are people who gather in groups and hunt one another. The largest I have ever heard of was 42 people in 7 teams. Apparently, 34 people died. They use flares to designate the start. And, sadly, the flare colors they use were colors for lost: orange, medical attention needed; red, fire warning; yellow, and a response; green. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe.